course, the child goes to the teacher who will guide that child.
What do you mean by external moral authority? You use that expression a lot.
Materialism has to do with when you are
Hello everyone, welcome back to the course in Values and Spirituality. Today we will be looking at the subject of effect of language on mentality. Effect of language on mentality. I'm here in the studio with Sister Denise. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Effect of language on mentality. I must say, when I read this section, I was surprised at the impact it had on one's consciousness, on one's behavior. What also surprised me is the volume it spoke about who and what you are. That really surprised me. You start off with the following words: the language you learn growing up helps determine your perception of the world. What do you mean by that?
The words you use, many of them are loaded. And a loaded word means a neutral word becomes negative or positive because of the load that you put on it. So, in some environments, people are very, very critical, and it's just across the board. And they tend to use words that are pejorative about people without thinking. But at the same time, it goes in to the people who are hearing it or who are described that way. And it's not only a matter of the words you use, but also, some people, they're all the time shouting, and they use high decibel language as well as being critical. And it takes you away from your natural peace and your natural qualities of love and respect and regard, which means that as you grow up, you just think insult is the right way to do things. If you're not insulting somebody, it means you're weak. And in that way, you start to perceive the world through that lens, with that bias, and it changes your mentality.
You go on to say, until you examine your use of language, you cannot take responsibility for your thinking processes, and you remain unaware of the extent to which they limit you. How does words limit you?
It's not just only words, but it's really the thinking processes and the type of language that you use. If you are in an environment where people make sure that they use words according to the meaning of those words, there's clarity. But a lot of people use words differently from their accepted meaning, and then it becomes unclear what it means. So you gather the meaning from the emotion and the energy with which it's expressed, and then you start to operate not on the basis of what a word means, but on what it does to you emotionally. One of the things I did when teaching this course was to insist that everyone comes with a dictionary. And then when I'm facilitating a group and someone uses a word and I realize that they don't know what that word means, or they are using it to mean something other than its dictionary meaning, I'll say, let's just take a look at the dictionary and see if we know what we're talking about here. And I think this is an important part of the education process, and that's not really to do with values unless you say it is a value to use a word according to its meaning. I mean, we're doing this course in English, but many of the people who are studying this, English is their second language.
Mm-hmm.
And you do get also situations where people use their native language at home and they use English in the school or in the professional or business arena, and then it means that things to do with the life at home and also your religious life are packaged in a different set of values. And very often you find that the archaic social values correspond with the native language, which correspond with the impact of the social attitudes and the religious approach to life, so that you may have a very patriarchal set of values for your home life, and then when it comes to your work life, you operate with a different set of values that you express in a different language, and you have compartmentalized your mind, and without realizing that you're operating in a manner that is double standards.
As I hear you speak, I cannot help but note that across the globe, whether young or old, the use of profanity has become quite commonplace. And people use this manner of speech, irrespective of whether they're professional or not, at home and at work and in a social setting, and it has become normal. What does the use of profanity say about human beings? I'm asking that question in light of what you said here. Your choice of words and your style of verbal communication reveal your attitude and feelings towards others and about yourself. I've seen people use profanities not because they're swearing at somebody or because they're angry at somebody, but it has become part of who they are and how they speak.
Well, that is quite a big issue, because even though you're not aware that you're using insulting language for anything and everything, but the impact of that insulting language is going into your subconscious, and it is affecting what happens to you, what comes back to you. And if you are in an environment where everybody is swearing at everybody and you don't do it, you sort of stand out as odd or different. So there's definitely a lot of peer pressure to conform. But I noticed one thing. When I started to engage actively in spiritual practice, it changes the vibration of yourself. And I also noticed that not only was I very clearly not using profanities, but I noticed that around me it caused people to stop doing it, which means that if everybody's using profanities, they're all operating, you could say, on a lower vibration, which makes you more what we call body conscious, more inclined to negativity, more emotionally reactive, and so on and so on. So that if you're careful about the quality of your consciousness, the vibration of your being, it's reflected in the way you speak. And you will tend to use words that are not designed to hurt people's feelings, because otherwise everybody goes around with a thick skin. And if you want to hurt somebody, it has to be really bad to get through that thick skin. And then you start to operate in a currency that is very contrary to your dignity as a human being and your quality as a spiritual being. So it kind of is a downward spiral.
I get from your words that very few people are aware of the impact of their words, and very few people are aware that how you say something is as important as what is contained in your words.
You know, a lot of swear words are to do with sexual attitudes that are insulting and demeaning and so on, which means that behind all of these words, your attitude towards people is that you really see them as an object to be debased, and then you'll never be able to have a quality relationship. That is there.
So the consequences are that far-reaching?
I would say.
I'm sure this comes as a surprise to many. Many are under the impression that so what if I swear and use the occasional profanity or use profanities commonly because I'm a good person, I treat people well, and besides, I don't mean it. Can you use that as an excuse?
If you don't mean it, then don't say it, because if you say it and you don't mean it, then you don't know what you're talking about. And you need the dictionary.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing that happens is people mix up slang and complicated words. They will be grammatical and ungrammatical in the same sentence. And some of this has to do with the fact that they're not speaking, say we go to English. English is not their first language, and they just won't know because they didn't learn the language in a formal setting. They picked it up from television or whatever, and they have no idea about the nuances of different ways of expressing yourself, and so they may be intending to express something, but it comes across as very different to someone who actually knows the words that they are using, and that will create a loss of good communication or miscommunication.
If you wish to convey to others the value of respect, love and regard, and you use punitive language or demeaning styles of talking, you are more likely to communicate this attitude than the idea you wish to convey.
Well, this goes back to if you say something, it means you mean it. And if you say you don't mean it, then use words that correspond to what you mean. Otherwise, you know, how are you going to expect anybody to understand you? And this is a complaint that people have. Nobody understands me.
Sister Denise, I'm thinking of the category of people who I call emotionally violent. One gets various levels of violence. You get people who are physically violent, and then you get people who are emotionally violent, who not necessarily are physically violent as well. Okay? And part of the manner in which emotionally violent people express themselves is through words.
Yes, you can also call it verbal abuse.
Yeah.
And verbal abuse used to be considered neutral, but nowadays it's been researched a lot more. It's come up in courts of law, and verbal abuse is now a real thing, you know. And so therefore you can be penalized if you're using very negative language, whereas previously it wasn't considered that something that the state would put restrictions on.
I suppose the consequences of speaking in that manner has become more and more dire, and we're shifting from a stage or space where you could speak to anybody however you want, but now more and more the consequences of your speech is something that you would have to deal with
and face, you see, because the idea of respect is gaining more and more currency. So if somebody speaks to me disrespectfully in the public, you know, that becomes character assassination, defamation, and there are laws about it, so I can get back to them. This also applies to the home, it applies to the work area, it applies to school. You know, for a teacher to insult a student, that student can go back to that teacher and say, you know, you called me names, that's not allowed, you will get punished.
Yeah.
And it does happen nowadays.
Yeah, with more and more frequency. I really like the note in which you ended this paragraph. You say, if you are honest and true to yourself, your words, body language, tone of voice, and facial expression correspond to the concepts you express. That is beautiful.
It's all about consistency, coherence, because if you say one thing and mean another, people will feel it. And people have a tendency to trust their intuition rather than their sense, their physical sense. You know, you may talk to me very politely, but behind it there will be an intention to hurt. I'll pick that up.
Yeah.
It'll be in the atmosphere and vibration, it'll be in the tone of voice, it'll be in the body language and the facial expressions. And what we, I think, want to do in a course like this is to cultivate a coherence between the inside and the outside, so that everything about you is what it says it is. And a person is really walking their talk, and people talk about the inside and the outside matching, and that's a very important value.
Tell us more about that. The inside and the outside matching. What do you mean?
What you say, how you say it, has to correspond with what you mean. And if you mean something else, the body language or the atmosphere will carry that. And the person who's receiving your message will experience that there's a double message here. And which one is the real one? Well, they're going to go for the subtle one, the inner one. Because we're all capable of lying. And if what you say externally doesn't correspond to the vibration that you're producing internally, then a person will say, well, this person's lying, because I detect the reality behind the words. Now, if somebody is true, and what they say is what they mean, all the different parts of the communication will line up, and then the person will believe it. It's not believable if there's two different types of message coming across, because you will pick it up with your intuition.
Treating another with respect and regard inspires them to pay attention to you, to listen to and respect what you are saying. How does one treat another with respect and regard? How do you show it in your entire stance? How is this message conveyed?
It's conveyed in how you look at them, in how you talk to them, what you say to them, that you listen to them, that you establish that you're on the same page, that they understand and feel that you have heard what they're saying, and that you're not looking at them according to some label, but you're actually seeing the person. And in spiritual practice, we learn something called soul conscious vision.
Which means what?
Well, it means that you actually see right through their face, right through their all their labels, and you go right to the person. And when a person feels that they've been seen, then they drop their defenses.
It's quite a universal need, isn't it, to be seen and to be heard?
It's very important, because without that, you're just an object, you see. You don't listen to an object. You know, there's talking at somebody and talking with somebody. It's very different.
When you mention language, part and parcel of communication also involves listening, doesn't it?
Of course.
So listening also tells you the way you listen, and whether or not you listen also says to the other person how you feel about them, whether you respect them or not.
You know, if you don't listen to a person, it's as if they're not there. And again, it's a kind of objectification of the person. You don't give them the time of day to hear what they have to say. That's already insulting. And so respect is where you're really seeing another person as who they are. Respect also has this meaning of look back.
What do you mean by that?
If you're being respectful, you're also looking back on the whole scene. When you're a sort of detached observer and you're operating according to your values, you'll be very aware of what you're doing and the impact of what you're doing and the impact of it on the other person and the impact of how they speak to you. Because it's not always that one person is respectful and the other one is automatically respectful. No. A lot of the time one person is disrespectful, which would trigger a disrespectful reaction in the other. But if the other one maintains their position, their policy of continuing to be respectful, that actually causes the situation to calm down and the currency of respect to be established. Because otherwise one person insults and that justifies a response or a reaction which is to give as good as you get plus a bit more, and people very easily escalate negative communication.
If you have a scenario where one person is calm and collected and respectful, and the person with whom they are conversing is emotionally violent, verbally violent, using profanities and being wretched in their behavior, tell us how the speaker can maintain the status quo. How do you prevent yourself from getting sucked into the negativity?
Well, the first thing is the respect has to be for the self. If you've been respectful to someone and they respond disrespectfully, then it's not suitable to carry on respecting them. What you have to do is respect yourself. And when you're respecting yourself, you're creating a different vibration, so that the other person is on the other side of an invisible shield. And you're going into your own power, into your own respect. You may take a step back, and certainly you be in a different sphere from them, and it's no longer a communication. Then you become an observer, and you might decide to wait till they're finished, or a good moment comes where in the non-conversation you say, well, that's very nice, have a nice day, see you later, and go, because there's no point in engaging at that level, you see. So for that, respect for yourself is key.
Sister Denise, please tell me how feelings come into play here, because your language is also connected to your feelings, isn't it? You have a lot of anger and rage, suppressed or not, inside. When you articulate your words, the feelings will be expressed in your use of words.
This is why the other person has to be independent and really come back into their own personal sphere of being, so that they don't get sucked in. And there's nothing that says you have to, you see, because when you get sucked in, you'll invariably say something that the other one will consider to be justification to increase the negativity.
I would now like to know how somebody who has a history of using profanities sees you on his computer screen, becomes deeply inspired to change, and wants to improve the quality of his life, including his use of language. Where do you begin to make the shift? Because it's a question of unlearning.
Do you remember on another program we talked about one of the powers, which I gave to you in the Indian language, Hindi language, Mahsusta ki Shakti, the power to feel. When a person practices meditation, this power to feel starts to intensify, and you will notice the dissonant vibration that occurs when you revert to your ordinary profane speaking, and you will have to decide what you want to choose. Do you want to be that way, or do you want to be something that corresponds more with your spiritual practice? And if you're going to do a spiritual practice, then anyway it's going to sensitize you towards the harmonious, the respectful, the recognition of the value of another human being and of your own self.
Thank you, Sister Denise. That was quite something. It's been half an hour that Sister Denise and I have been having this conversation on the effect of language on one's mentality. Sister Denise has, in a matter of 10 or so lines, conveyed the importance of paying attention to one's language, choosing your words carefully. And I really like the note in which she ended today's talk, that between conversations and between tasks, to come back to your spiritual identity and give that energy, connect with your spiritual identity and take power from that, and let that be infused in your words. A very profound message indeed. Thank you, Sister Denise.
Thank you.
So there you go, something to take forward with you in your daily life, and I do hope that your language skills, not just what you say but how you say it, reveals the truth about who you are, and that is that you are a child of the divine. Do take care, and thank you for joining us today. Goodbye.